I hear explosions outside.
From the front lines overseas.
What we found was the civilians were being targeted by Russian forces as they fled.
To the American home front.
The recycling system, it's a broken system.
As a society, we were supposed to be creating a safety net for them, and we weren't living up to that promise.
Stories that made a difference.
Her work is setting the agenda in the state of Michigan.
What are you fighting for?
I am fighting for our constitutional rights to save America, I guess.
The journalists behind the stories.
It's really important as journalists to be able to show that the reporting is the truth.
Exposing wrongs.
Why has the U.S. not conducted an independent investigation?
Was Jeff killed because of the work that he did?
Breaking boundaries.
We would love to have the black athlete, but we didn't want the black mind.
I don't think I've ever been involved in anything that has gotten this type of reform.
For 70 years, Scripps Howard has honored the best in American journalism.
When you can contribute to a national conversation, that's the kind of impact you dream about as a journalist.
Tonight, we again shine a light.
When you actually see it and you document it and you prove it, it's irrefutable.
Good evening. I'm Scripps News anchor Christian Bryant and host of tonight's Scripps Howard Awards, coming to you from our nation's capital. For 70 years, Scripps Howard has honored great reporting, from Washington to communities across the U.S. to the farthest reaches of the globe. What you're about to see is some of the best and most innovative American journalism over the past year. You'll get a chance to meet some of the people who made those stories possible and the communities impacted by that reporting. Some of those nominated tonight are providing the same essential on-the-ground coverage from Ukraine that the first Scripps Howard Award winners did 7 decades ago from Korea. While the tools of the trade have been transformed, from typewriters to Twitter, black and white film to crowdsourced video, the mission remains the same. Our 42 finalists have been chosen from among 780 entries for upholding the core principles of journalism in this rapidly changing world. At a time when trust in journalism remains near an all-time low and our industry is increasingly under attack, we'll show you the lengths to which our finalists go to get the story right and how their reporting makes a difference in people's lives. We've assembled a roster of veteran journalists to help me announce winners from among 15 categories, along with cash awards worth a total of $170,000. The night ends with the presentation of the prestigious Impact Award. So, let's begin now with the Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in Breaking News. The finalists are Indianapolis Star, the Columbus Dispatch, Cincinnati Enquirer, and USA Today for their combined coverage of a 10-year-old's abortion.
The Dobbs decision basically triggered a heartbeat law in Ohio, which made abortion after 6 weeks illegal.
Sherry learns about individuals from Kentucky and Ohio seeking more abortions within Indiana.
It was like the first representation of what it looks like to have restricted access in your state in a really real way.
Just imagine being that little girl, 10 years old.
Then it became a political football.
First it was this child didn't exist, couldn't exist.
We're gonna own this story, we know it's true, and we're gonna take it to the next step.
We were able to request from the Indiana State Department of Health the termination report.
I was the only reporter there in the courtroom. That detective said under oath the 10-year-old had become pregnant, had gone to Indianapolis, and had an abortion performed, matching the timeline that had been given to the Indianapolis Star.
And that's exactly why I think everybody who's in local journalism is in the business.
That's the kind of impact you dream about as a journalist, is making people think.
And that's really what I think a democracy is about, is having educated voters that can make educated decisions that reflect their values.
The Texas Tribune and ProPublica for the Uvalde shooting and its aftermath.
Uvalde County 911. It's a school shooting.
May 24th, 2022 is certainly a day I'll never forget.
We started to hear reports that there might have been a school shooting in Uvalde, and that was when we kind of started to mobilize the newsroom.
I went to the community center where they had gathered the parents, and all of a sudden I hear like this sounded like an animal screaming. People were being told that they were never going to see their child again.
My assignment was trying to find relatives, families, people affected by the shooting.
We started to find out that the way it was being portrayed wasn't completely true. The first kind of inkling of information about that was from talking to parents who had lined up trying to pick up their children and realizing their children were still inside the school, even though the shooting had been going on for over an hour.
Knowing that you're going to come back over and over, looking at the teddy bears that get soaked in rain and then get dried in the sun, it's hard, but also extremely rewarding. The stories that you end up doing, you feel really matter.
And the third finalist and winner is the Washington Post for its comprehensive reporting on the start of the war in Ukraine. Congratulations.
There had started to be some rumblings that things were going to start early in the morning. I couldn't sleep in my hotel room that night because I was so scared. I hear explosions outside. I kind of calmly walked into the bathroom, brushed my teeth, put on my flak jacket, and we just got to work that morning.
Bombs were falling in neighborhoods, residential buildings, hospitals. A lot of people were losing loved ones.
There's this phenomenon called fog of war, which I'd heard about but never really understood until those first few days. People were just in disbelief that Russia had invaded them.
Это непередаваемо. Это как будто бы ты живешь в другой реальности. Какой-то сюр.
There was long lines outside gas stations, long lines outside ATMs, and a lot of fear.
So sometimes you were doing your work as a journalist, but also experiencing all of this terror as well.
A lot of those early days were dictated by how bad and how intense the bombings were, where we'd run out, do as much as we could, get back in, and try to get that footage out as quickly as possible.
Even if it was minute details, they felt important because you were trying to explain to someone sitting in America what it felt like to be sheltering in an underground metro. We went out to try and do some reporting, and while we were in the car, we heard really, really loud booms.
As a photojournalist, I have to really make people feel what I'm seeing. I cannot call somebody, I cannot look outside the window, describe a scene. I had to be in the middle of some dangerous situations. It was all about photographing with my heart.
By the third and fourth day, you could see this switch in the psyche of Ukrainians. From being scared and uncertain to being angry, to doing everything they could to help with this war effort.
It was important to highlight the Ukrainian resistance and bravery, especially as it influenced foreign policy decisions.
We were able to share what was happening on the ground minute by minute by sending photos live from the camera all the way back to the newsroom.
I think our work from the early days really helped capture what the average civilian was going through. From a little girl who was celebrating her 5th birthday from a bunker, to men signing up, to people making Molotov cocktails in their basement.
I heard a little boy playing the piano in the lobby. I took out my phone and recorded it. It just went viral because it was this beautiful, beautiful moment in such chaos.
Showing people with incredible courage, doing things that they didn't even know they were capable of, and atrocities, because that was what this war really brought out. The best of humanity and the worst of humanity.
2022 was a momentous year in journalism dominated by the war in Ukraine. Reporters risked their lives and safety to bring us searing images from the front lines and beyond. Back home, they covered the battles on the political and ideological front. Our next category celebrates excellence in national and international video storytelling and honors Jack R. Howard, a former Scripps president and broadcasting pioneer. The finalists are Al Jazeera English Fault Lines for the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh.
Shireen Abu Akleh was one of the most prominent journalists of her generation.
She inspired so many young Arab and Palestinian girls to pursue journalism, but also for the Palestinian people who saw someone who was really covering the daily indignities that they go through.
One of the key pieces of evidence in our investigation was a video by a resident.
The only reason that we were able to report on the killing is because that footage exists.
Immediately after Shireen was killed, Israeli officials claimed that she was killed by Palestinian gunmen.
From day one, the eyewitnesses on the scene were saying this was an Israeli soldier who killed Shireen.
Shireen was also an American citizen. Why has the US not conducted an independent investigation to the killing of an American citizen? Almost a year into her killing, we still don't have accountability.
The goal really was to put pressure on American authorities, but also just to keep her in the news so it's not forgotten.
شيرين أبو عقلة، الجزيرة، القدس المحتلة.
Frontline for the war on Ukraine.
At Frontline, we're always looking at what are the biggest stories of the year, what is the journalism that really needs to happen. As soon as Russia invaded Ukraine, we decided to dispatch a couple of teams into Ukraine.
He's been called the most dangerous man in the world.
He's gotten away with everything so far, so why not push it a little step further?
In this 5 groups of films, we were able to capture real stories of humanity, and then to combine that with investigative journalism on the ground that really is looking to hold those to account. The most amazing thing that we found doing this reporting are the local journalists reporting on what's happening in real time. Their families are at risk. Their own lives are at risk. We're having the impact of being on the record about what we believe are egregious acts, what the Ukrainian people have had to bear witness to the consequences of this invasion.
And the third finalist and winner is Frontline and the Associated Press for Michael Flynn's Holy War, a documentary that details Flynn's role in the far right's assault on democracy.
We are a faith-based society. It's in the DNA of the United States of America. Tonight, you're going to get an ass chewing from a general.
I've been covering Michael Flynn since 2017. He was Trump's first national security advisor, and he was pushed out for lying to the FBI.
I knew that General Flynn had been one of the architects of the transformation of American warfighting and the rise of covert war. But until I met Michelle and began to become a part of her investigation, I didn't know that he was at the very first Right to Life rally, and he drove pro-life floats in local parades. He had spent his entire life on the front lines of the culture war and on the front lines of America's covert wars overseas.
We didn't know that he had been in the Oval Office meeting with Trump, and we didn't know what he was planning, what he envisioned. After the presidential election of 2020, Flynn was pardoned. He became a leading figure leading up to January 6th.
Number one, President Trump won.
He was fully and openly engaged, working to sow doubt about the election.
He could take military capabilities and he could place them in those states and basically rerun an election.
Flynn championed bogus claims about ballot tampering and foreign interference. He became a chief promoter of the Stop the Steal effort, which culminated in the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol.
Michael Flynn is part of what I see as an extremist element surrounding Donald Trump.
Since January 6th, Michael Flynn has been traveling around the country, building up a political network based around Christian nationalist ideas and building political power.
He is embraced as a patriot, a hero, a prophet, an evangelist.
What are you fighting for?
I am fighting for our constitutional rights to save America, I guess.
After our project came out, a lot more news organizations are paying close attention. Flynn has been easy to dismiss because a lot of the things he says seem outrageous or seem fringy, but what we showed is he's not fringe. There is lots of energy in this movement, and it goes beyond Trump.
I hope the film's impact is that it helps us understand this moment we're in. Michael Flynn's not done, and we're still on this beat, and I would not be surprised at all if our paths cross again.
And is this an awakening in the biblical sense? Is this a spiritual awakening? You bet it is. We are at the edge. Some of our country is already down into the abyss.
Coming up.
There's never been a more difficult time to do this work, but also there's never been a more important time.
Every day at work, I'm reminded of the legendary Scripps Howard newspaperman Ernie Pyle, a journalist in whose footsteps I am humbled to follow. This is one of his expense reports from the field, requesting reimbursement for items needed to do his job. This one really gets me. Spirits for courage. Whatever it takes, right? As a World War II correspondent in Europe and the Pacific, Pyle was known for his syndicated columns which brought home the human stories of ordinary American soldiers fighting an inhuman war. Sadly, like many brave journalists before and since, Ernie Pyle was killed doing his job. That was in 1945 while reporting from Japan. Here to present the Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in Narrative Human Interest Storytelling, honoring Ernie Pyle, is ABC's David Muir.
Thank you, Christian, and good evening. Just as it was for Ernie Pyle and generations of journalists,
It's our privilege here at ABC News to report the untold stories, to give so many a voice who otherwise wouldn't have one. Important stories, intimate ones, stories about people making a difference and about their mission. The finalists for the Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in Narrative Human Interest Storytelling, honoring Ernie Pyle, are serial productions for We Were Three.
At about midnight, my brother sent me a text that said, "I've been too distraught to tell you, but Dad passed away." She called her brother. I said, "Peter, what is happening? What happened?"
I was truly just blown away to discover that my dad died slowly of COVID.
Rachel McKibbins is a poet and a writer. She wrote on Twitter about her father and brother dying of COVID. It was an arresting story.
When you look at COVID reporting, it tends to be very big. It's global. And this story takes a different approach. It zooms really far in on just a handful of people.
My intention with the story wasn't, I'm going to tell the other side, because it didn't seem like another side. It just seemed like we're all in this mess together.
What's left in the waning days? The country we were before we lost over 1 million people to COVID. The country we still are.
It wasn't just a COVID story. It was just very much about three people who loved each other, maybe didn't love each other in the ways that were healthiest, but they tried. And at the end of the day, we have each other or nobody.
60 Minutes for Sharswood.
The story is about a family who didn't know anything about their background, discovering their ancestors were slaves, and they end up living in the place where their ancestors suffered.
Sharswood was the name of a major plantation.
I grew up about a half mile from there.
What did you think of you owning a plantation?
I was a little shocked by that, I would say. A lot of people want the entire story of slavery to just blow away.
You want the story of slavery told.
I want the story of slavery told. It's important.
We were flooded with people talking about how meaningful the story had been. My hope in telling this story is that people will appreciate the importance of history, the importance of journalism in looking into history, the role that history plays in our lives.
People say, you people in television, you never do positive stories. Man, if that isn't a positive story, I don't know what is.
And the third finalist and the winner is Lost in Ohio, a New York Times Magazine profile of homeless children in rural areas and the role schools play in trying to help them.
I got interested in struggles that students experiencing homelessness face when my son's friend became homeless.
She became very curious just about this system. She knew there were 100,000 homeless school children and wanted to understand how it all worked.
It impacts families and children to a much greater degree than is understood. And these impacts are a slow-moving crisis.
In rural America, homelessness can be almost invisible.
It's easily hidden because of the vast land, and it doesn't look like they're on the streets.
They may be living in substandard housing.
We have a lot of shacks and shanties, campers. People don't look at that as homelessness.
Because homelessness isn't really considered an issue in rural areas, there's just not a lot of attention and there's not a lot of support.
The school is the point of contact because other agencies and people aren't out there in the community looking for them.
One of the people I talked to in Ohio was really excited about the opportunity to draw attention to the fact that homelessness exists in rural areas, so I knew that they would help me find the families.
The kids, their stories are all the same. They don't want people to know, and they're all just looking for help.
I was not going to school. I lived in a trailer. The electric would hardly work, and water did not work at all.
We were given the camper to stay in. We had to walk to go to the bathroom.
It's different out here. Lots of people struggling to find homes go in a downward spiral.
For me as a reporter, all the little details are crucial. With rural homelessness, there isn't even good data, and if you can't name the problem, then you can't do anything about the problem.
I didn't know how she would make our families feel, but Samantha was amazing.
When I first met her, we were in the weight room for football, and she just wanted to talk about me instead of what we were going through.
A lot of the work was tracking people down. Their first priority is not talking to the media, and I think that's our role as journalists, is to try to find the people who don't have anyone already speaking for them.
I have taken in over $24,000 in donations as a direct result of the story. And that's incredible because they can relate and truly wanted to make a difference.
By having a story like that, we are re-engaging people in conversation. And if we don't try to have a dialogue about how we consider changing it, there will be another generation of kids in 10 or 20 years.
The finalists in our next category have stretched the boundaries of audio storytelling, proving the age-old power of the voice as an agent of change. Here to present the Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in Audio Storytelling, honoring Jack R. Howard, is someone who knows more than a thing or two about getting the audience to listen. Maria Hinojosa of Latino USA on NPR and founder of Futuro Media.
At the time of the first Scripps Howard Awards, radio felt like it was starting to be taken over by television. It seemed, that audio might be drowned out by this flashing new medium called TV, and people were a little afraid of that. But you know what? 70 years later, by continuing to push boundaries and to embrace new formats like podcasting, audio is reaching millions and influencing real change. Tonight's finalists for the Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in Audio Storytelling are the Marshall Project and NPR for how the newest federal prison became one of the deadliest.
In 2016, Joe Shapiro at NPR and I did a story about Lewisburg Penitentiary.
Men being forced into cells with other men who they didn't get along with, who there was reason to believe they would have to fight.
There was a huge level of violence.
And we show that the rates of violence went up.
Lewisburg closed and moved into this shiny new facility in Thompson, Illinois.
So we wanted to know, at Thompson, were things better? We found that conditions were just as awful, maybe worse, than at Lewisburg.
7 prisoners have died violently at Thompson. Sue Phillips thinks prison guards had to know what was going to happen when they put her son Matthew into a recreation cage with 2 members of a white supremacist prison gang.
Even at the end of his life, Matt was treated with such a lack of dignity.
The Bureau of Prisons decided to close Thompson, and we know that closure came as a result of a federal investigation which was launched because of our reporting. True impact can only happen when you really stay on the story.
The Seattle Times and KNKX Public Radio for The Walk Home.
From KNKX Public Radio and the Seattle Times, this is The Walk Home. The Walk Home is about the police killing of Manny Ellis by Tacoma police officers on March 3rd, 2020.
Someone at the scene clicked on a radio for 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds, it captured Manny saying, "I can't breathe."
You can breathe. He was killed by the police! Less than 2 minutes away from here!
The only reason we know about this story is because of one woman, Manny's little sister, Monet.
There's no shortage of stories about unjust deaths of black men in police custody, but what there aren't a lot of are stories where that man's little sister stood up to all the forces working against her and did her damnedest to get justice.
It was really a story about what happened to all of us and how we had metabolized that.
It brought to light that some of the highest leaders of Pierce County and the city of Tacoma were aware within 24 hours that this was likely a homicide caused by police.
There's never been a more difficult time to do this work, but also there's never been a more important time.
And the third finalist and winner is American Public Media for Sold a Story, how teaching America's kids to read went so wrong.
I see a cup of noodles on there.
We had noticed that Zoe was having some trouble reading, but when I heard her class all together, I heard that all of the kids were struggling to read really in the same way.
This is Sold a Story, a podcast from American Public Media. I am the host of the podcast, Sold a Story, How Teaching Kids to Read Went So Wrong. And it's about one idea. Kids are not being taught how to read because for decades, teachers have been sold an idea about reading and how children learn to do it. And that idea is wrong. The idea was for them to see the same words over and over again and memorize them.
It really makes them perform reading.
These were things kids were supposed to do when they came to a word they didn't know, strategies to figure out the word. They were things like, look at the picture, think of a word that makes sense. What the cognitive science research shows is that beginning readers need to be taught how to sound out words. If they don't learn how to do that, many of them never become very good readers.
But this other idea has been out there that's caused this core element of reading instruction to be left out.
The people who have been selling this idea somehow ignored or explained away a whole lot of evidence that showed the idea was wrong. And they went on to make a lot of money.
And we investigated the one publishing company and their 4 main authors that sold it to the education system. These people were seen as experts. They teach at prestigious institutions.
Their books on teaching reading became must-haves for teachers.
I used to call them my Bibles.
Yeah, I kept it as my Bible.
The most moving response that we've gotten are from people who've written to us and said, you know, I always thought I had a disability, but I'm starting to realize no one ever taught me how to read.
What's different this time is that parents are now asking questions of their school. How do you actually teach reading? Do you cover phonics? Are you following basically what the scientific evidence shows?
I really put together a curriculum around the science of reading. The progress that Zoe has made from reading is really like nothing I've ever seen.
After Sold a Story, it was a lot of teachers saying, I didn't know this, I want to know this. There are people all over the country. They recognize themselves, their children.
The podcast gave it a legitimacy where the conversation opened up.
School districts are changing one by one, playing parts of our podcast at these school board meetings.
It's called Sold a Story.
Sold a Story.
It's called Sold a Story.
I'm a reporter.
So there's a real grassroots movement that's different, and states are getting involved.
Since the podcast, 15 states are taking some kind of new action related to reading instruction, and we've been able to show that a lot of that really is directly related to Sold a Story.
If I'd have only reacted when I got a notification, we'd have very well been engulfed in fire.
Welcome back. Our next award, Distinguished Service to the First Amendment, was created in 1976 in honor of our country's bicentennial. This award, named for Scripps founder Edward Willis Scripps, promotes journalism that defends the rights of free speech and a free press. Scripps' motto for the last century has been, "Give light and the people will find their own way." Tonight's finalists do just that. They are Las Vegas Review-Journal, for the murder of investigative reporter Jeff Gehrman.
Las Vegas police are investigating the tragic killing of our own Review-Journal investigative reporter Jeff Gehrman.
Jeff was an unrelenting bulldog of a reporter. We knew that we needed to finish the stories that he was working on. One of those was Robert Tellis. Jeff had done a story that cost him re-election.
Mr. Tellis had been contacting Gehrman on Twitter, attacking Jeff's reporting and the Review-Journal and Jeff himself.
Tellis was arrested Wednesday on suspicion of murder in the fatal stabbing of Gehrman.
They had seized Jeff's devices, which we knew would contain news-gathering material. That then became a huge issue for us.
Jeff would have wanted us to take up this fight for him.
This is a fight that's been going on since September of 2022 with daily need for us to be in court.
It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the justice system to dig into the career of one of the best investigative reporters in Nevada history.
Traverse City Record Eagle and CNHI News for Unguarded.
Unguarded really started with just a single story about a Michigan State Police investigation into a case of financial abuse of an elderly person.
It all started when my wife passed away. The conservator stated to me that she's really going to help me.
About $16,000 of his money disappeared before this person ever had to report anything to the court.
Why did they do all this stuff? I thought they're supposed to help senior citizens.
You can be a conservator and a guardian as long as you're over 18. What I found was really disturbing, both in terms of the number of people that were being taken advantage of, the level of the theft. I mean, it was in every county.
Marty has been blazing a trail. Her work is setting the agenda in the state of Michigan.
And the third finalist and winner is Insider for Deaths in the Family, a trailblazing investigation of violence against the transgender community.
It was a little bit of a personal project because I was just curious about trans homicides in the United States. I'm a trans woman, so it strikes close to home.
Deaths in the Family looked at 5 years of homicides of transgender people in the United States. This is a hugely underreported story, a huge story of our times.
It's devastating, it's heartbreaking. This is somebody's daughter, this is somebody's child, this is somebody who was proud of who they are, and they were murdered and didn't even get justice for their murder.
The more I looked into this, the more I realized there wasn't a federal entity that was like collecting information on transgender homicides in the US. I spent a lot of time diving through reports and compiled lists online, trying to verify, validate trans homicides, people that could have been me.
We found that the suspects were overwhelmingly young men.
There are certain states around the country that allowed trans panic defenses, which basically is somebody saying, the trans person tricked me, I didn't know they were trans, so I acted in defense and attacked them, killed them, and stunningly, that's a defense that works sometimes.
We have been the dog whistle for anybody on the right to be able to rally their base.
The correlation between that rhetoric, those political attacks, and the rise in violence is sharply visible in the data.
In 2022, there was over 240 bills that were passed that were anti-LGBT, and most of them were against trans people. Projects like this help us to debunk myths about trans people in our murders.
It turned out of 175 cases, more than 60 were unsolved, only 28 murder convictions. In our reporting, we witnessed transphobia at every level of the criminal justice system.
Some cases have been reopened. Some cases have gotten indictments. Our data has pushed them to be more accountable, not to just throw our cases and throw our lives away.
This is an American tragedy that we as a nation are allowing this level of hatred and this amount of violence to unfold is unacceptable.
The many issues that challenge our country, from inequity and addiction to corruption and climate change, are experienced daily by people throughout this nation. They're also the focus of incredible reporting and storytelling by local reporters. Here to present the award for excellence in local video storytelling, honoring Jack R. Howard, is PBS NewsHour co-host Jeff Bennett.
Good evening. A bedrock of video journalism is the hard work of local reporters and producers around the country. The power of local broadcasting can't be underestimated. In-depth local reporting can mobilize citizens around issues central to their communities: street crime, drugs, homelessness, even the threat of wildfires. The finalists are KGW for one day.
Good morning, Portland. Scattered showers once again and temperatures on the cool side.
One Day really is a comprehensive look at the response to homelessness in Portland at a 24-hour period.
People don't really have a good idea of the nuances of what this crisis actually looks like.
You know, journalistically, this is the biggest issue that our city confronts.
We wanted to hear from service providers, fire and law enforcement, ER doctors.
But the reality is that every day is so different. We just captured one day.
Several of the women we featured who were homeless ended up using this to secure housing.
I think this really speaks to what we do at KGW. It's innovative storytelling.
So I think people really reacted very positively to being able to see an aspect of the people dealing with this crisis that you can't just see when you drive by a tent on the street.
When people band together to help each other, we can get a lot done in one day.
One day I will take off and you will never see me homeless again.
NBC Bay Area for saving San Francisco.
I have had a restraining order against a man who has been stalking me for over 5 years.
That man is James Durgan.
Saving San Francisco is our effort to tell the story of homelessness in San Francisco.
San Francisco may be the tech capital of the universe, but it's still struggling with homelessness.
James Durgan has no real resources to fix his situation.
He has 60 felonies, 16 restraining orders. He just cycles in and out of the justice system.
If we can explore and investigate how this happened to James Durgan, that might give us some insight onto the problems and obstacles facing roughly 8,000 other homeless people in this city.
With video journalism, we have the gift of being able to take somebody into a situation, have them experience it in an immersive way. And if it's done thoughtfully and carefully, it won't manipulate, it will just put you inside somebody else's shoes.
It really got people talking about what it means to have a working criminal justice system and why are we letting something so broken continue.
And the third finalist and winner is KUSA TV for Burned, a year-long visual investigation into how a small Colorado wildfire exploded into a monster.
December 30, 2021.
Marshall Fire broke out between Christmas and New Year's.
This was unprecedented because of how quickly it moved into neighborhoods.
And it blew up in a short period of time.
That day, people's lives were at stake.
My fiance and I were home at the time. Our notice to leave was the fact that we literally saw the smoke and saw the fire coming towards us.
Within a few hours, that entire subdivision was leveled.
Holy evacuate now! Holy crap!
Everybody who was in the newsroom were immediately called to sort of go cover what's going on with the fire right now. And this was an all-day event for our newsroom.
This is a very bad situation for this neighborhood.
And by the next day, the damage had been done.
A lot of people in Boulder County had questions.
What are the things we can learn from a fire like this?
Why wasn't I alerted? Why didn't I know it was time to leave?
We've relied on an antiquated system for telling people, hey, you need to get out.
If I'd have only reacted when I got a notification, we'd have very well been engulfed in fire.
It prompted our team to really ask questions of their Office of Emergency Management. We found that approval from the FCC to use this wireless emergency alert. They hadn't got their own processes in place to use it.
We weren't highlighting a legislative flaw, we were highlighting a systemic flaw.
So because of that and our questions, they stood up that part of their office and have since been using wireless emergency alerts.
The goal for this was always to be multimedia. Chris started filing dozens of open records requests with all of the other agencies that responded to this fire.
Once we had the database of the video, the GPS locations, we thought the map was the best place for it because
it recreates minute by minute what people saw on the ground at that particular time.
It was very much a puzzle. With this documentary, we wanted to give voice to people that experienced the fire that day.
Journalism has been forced to adapt. We're now thinking not just television, but what we can do on all sorts of mediums.
This project is really an example of what can be great that's changing about journalism. I just hope that someone who watches this documentary feels more prepared if they ever find themselves in this scenario.
Coming up.
A man came up to me and asked me what I was doing, threatened me with a bullet in my head. It was dangerous, but you know, in the end, I have a story to tell.
At a time when billions of dollars travel invisibly through cyberspace, financial reporting is more crucial than ever. Business reporters today must understand the impact of complex economics and be fluent when it comes to blockchain, AI, and big data. Tonight's finalists for the Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in Business and Financial Reporting worked tirelessly to expose corruption and fight for transparency. They are Bloomberg News for Microfinance Misery.
Microfinance in the early 2000s was viewed as the silver bullet. You give money to poor people, let them take small loans, and it helps them bootstrap themselves and become self-sufficient.
Y de ahí, pues ya mi inquietud fue pues adquirir un terreno de donde vivir.
But once people saw that there was a lot of money to be made there, it was like ringing the dinner bell.
Hundreds of millions of dollars of public money for foreign development aid were instead flowing to lenders who were employing predatory debt collection and lending practices. They were just looking to make a buck.
We filed freedom of information requests. We got private records.
In Cambodia, we found women whose land land had been forcibly expropriated. In Jordan, microfinance companies were reporting indebted women to the judicial authorities.
I view our role as holding the government accountable. The government should make sure that it's not doing more harm than good to the people it's supposed to help.
USA Today for Dying for Care.
This project, Dying for Care, was looking at how nursing homes fared during a particularly deadly time of COVID.
We started with the universe of 15,000 nursing homes and step by step narrowed our reporting focus until we got to Trilogy. Trilogy stood out as having reported a death rate twice as high as the national average.
Someone's making money, and it's certainly not going toward care. There are thousands of nursing homes with not a single registered nurse on duty for 24 hours at a stretch. And Jamie was instrumental in creating what turned into the nursing home report card.
We were surprised the day after the story ran to get an email from the White House.
As a result, there is going to be additional scrutiny of the financial models behind nursing homes, and they're going to have clearer rules for staffing size and ratio to patients.
This story exemplifies the best of journalism in our persistence and accountability focus we had from the start.
And the third finalist and winner is Los Angeles Times for Legal Weed, Broken Promises, exposing corruption and danger in the big business of legalized marijuana.
It started with us wanting to take a look at the legalization of cannabis in California. Everyone thought it was going to be great. It hasn't worked out for the growers, it hasn't worked out for the dispensaries. There's more illegal growing now, maybe than ever before.
The state bureaucracies that are supposed to be in control don't know what's going on. And no one had done a accountability story of what's going on here. Is this working?
The legislation had all of these key vulnerabilities. They wanted the courts to wipe people's records clean, and yet they put in no mechanism to make sure that it would happen. They wanted a well-regulated market, but they put in no anti-corruption protection to make sure that the black market wouldn't explode.
So that is the outlaw market. That's typical of what we're seeing statewide. But this is a hidden world, and the only way to do that kind of reporting was to be there, talking to people who are growing illegally or workers who have slipped into this country and are desperate for the money.
We just kind of said, why don't we put this all together into a big series?
We're talking photo, video, podcast people, social justice reporters, and just bringing us together and then letting us loose.
We went up and down the state, dug up real estate records, cannabis licensing files, so they left regulation up to the counties and cities. That decision was really the original sin. We uncovered a case of bribery where a six-figure sum was offered in a brown paper bag to a council member.
And in my case, it's rumored that people were dying in the greenhouses turned out to be true.
They'd be using propane heaters indoors without proper ventilation.
Trying to heat their little huts. I mapped 3,000 square miles of known cultivation centers. When you know where the grows are and you know you're looking for carbon monoxide, all of a sudden I could find these deaths and nobody was reporting it. These people were invisible.
Building trust with your subjects, especially on a project like this, it's pretty important. A man came up to me and asked me what I was doing, threatened me with a bullet in my head. It was dangerous, but in the end, I have a story to tell.
We're able to show that it's basically a failure.
And so if consumers become aware of what went into creating that product, then they have the ability to act responsibly.
The impact has been big. They're going to consider launching a state investigation into corruption in licensing.
So this not only gives a voice to people who are being exploited, now it's holding people accountable to those promises.
Our next award recognizes reporting on an increasingly important topic, the environment. And it honors Ted Scripps, founder of the Scripps Howard Foundation and pioneering environmental journalist. Speaking of pioneering journalists who've covered the impact of climate change and environmental disasters, here's Univision host Jorge Ramos.
Good evening. The reporting I do often means challenging those in power about critical issues. Here in Miami, the threat of rising sea levels is proof that the environment is one of those issues. When this award was created nearly 60 years ago, few understood the problem of climate change. Today, we know That time is running out, and that environmental journalism is more essential than ever. Tonight's nominees tell powerful stories of pollution, drought, and climate disaster, all crucial in protecting the health of our planet. The finalists for the Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in Environment Reporting honoring the Scripps are Bloomberg for Big Plastic, tracking the life cycle of plastic waste in unprecedented detail.
We wanted to tell the story of what actually happened to plastic once it gets thrown in the trash. Our main innovation for the series was the use of digital trackers to actually follow plastic around the world.
It started in ordinary American homes where people thought that they were recycling their plastic.
We kind of watched in amazement as our trackers took these journeys of thousands of miles.
This field of plastic is right behind a village. There are children playing nearby. We've walked through it, and surprisingly, most of this plastic comes from overseas, mostly from the US and Canada.
The entire industry is now geared around trying to get us to pretend that we can recycle it. It turns out it's not that easy.
The companies that sell plastic and make billions of dollars from doing so are not going to change their behavior unless there is pressure from their customers or pressure from governments.
And I think once people really connect with that, then you start to really make positive choices, hopefully choices that change your use of plastic.
The Arizona Republic and Arizona Central for the Colorado River crisis.
This past year was the 100th anniversary of the Colorado River Compact that divided up the river among the 7 states. Things have changed. There's suddenly 40 million people, and there's a lot less water because of drought and climate change.
Our job is to find the people on the ground who have the most to lose, and in this case, we felt it was the farmers because they do account for most of the water.
We drove up through Arizona, Utah, into Wyoming.
We flew over re-emerging rapids above Lake Powell.
What we thought was low in 2007 wasn't.
To tribes, water is way more than a commodity. Water is life. We have the most senior water rights of anybody.
When they divided up the river, none of the tribes were invited to that. Our goal was to show why a solution would mean everybody playing some role.
One of our Arizona senators formed a water advisory board.
Our governor proposed spending $1 billion over the next 3 years to try to find solutions. We play a role in bringing that story out.
What the reporting conveys is that we're all going to sink or swim with this. If everyone doesn't pitch in, then the system crashes.
And the winner is ProPublica and the New York Times for Barbados Resists Climate Colonialism, about how one Caribbean island is fighting climate change and challenging the global financial system.
Smaller, poor countries are the most vulnerable of anywhere in the world to climate impacts, especially in the islands of the Caribbean.
We're getting devastating floods. We're getting, at the same time, every year, lengthening droughts.
This story about Barbados and the debt of small island nations was a project to look at how smaller and poorer countries around the world were able to adapt to climate change and how the debt burdens that they carry would affect their ability to adapt.
When you're talking about billions of dollars, when you're talking about huge international bureaucracies, how do you turn that into something that people can understand?
Barbados had this very charismatic prime minister, Mia Mottley, who was using her gifts as a leader to really summon momentum around a more equitable and fair debt system. Avinash Persod is Mia Mottley's key economic advisor.
We believe we've got an idea. It's about how we're going to make it easier for climate vulnerable countries to borrow money from the development banks.
A couple months after my story published, Mia Mottley and Avinash Persod go to the COP27 climate conference, and they propose what ultimately became the Bridgetown Initiative.
I don't need to repeat the horror and the devastation wreaked upon this earth. But what we do need to do is to understand why we are not moving any further.
The Bridgetown Initiative proposes to charge $13 trillion in reserves that the IMF holds to use that huge asset to start to fund some of these programs to aid small countries around the world.
In the 12 months before the story, our plight was a fringe story. In the 12 months afterwards, the Bridgetown Initiative has become possibly the dominant idea around in international finance.
Having an in-depth exploration of this issue published on the platform of the New York Times Magazine and the platform of ProPublica, I think put pressure on the IMF at a critical turning point.
I know a lot of journalists. He was really in depth and serious and wanted to get the right story. Not his story, but the right story.
We have a responsibility to take difficult issues and make them accessible and understandable, but also to ensure that our leaders are ultimately accountable to us and to the countries that they serve.
Coming up.
What we were looking at was actually a cleansing operation unfolding in real time on video.
Nothing says investigative journalism better than this iconic building behind me, the Watergate. Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein and their screen versions Redford and Hoffman still serve as a model of what journalism can accomplish. Presenting the Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in National or International Investigative Reporting, the Ursula and Gilbert Farfel Prize, is Sewell Chan, who runs the investigative powerhouse, the Texas Tribune.
Throughout my career, I've worked with some great investigative journalists, helping develop their stories from hunches into front-page news. You can see why Hollywood films, like All the President's Men, have so much appeal. The reality, though, is investigative journalism today faces many obstacles. It's getting harder to gain access to public records and meetings. Some officials demonize the press and ignore its legitimate role in our democracy. Journalists face threats to their safety, both online and in real life. Despite these challenges, reporters continue to do the hard work, obtaining records, talking to sources, exposing wrongdoing, and proving how essential their journalism is. It's my honor to present the finalists for the Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in National or International Investigative Reporting. Blackout by the Washington Post, an exploration of the NFL's systematic exclusion of African American coaches.
Blackout is about the ways in which the NFL has kept black men out of positions of power in the coaching profession.
This is not just about second chances, this is about first chances for a lot of coaches.
Number one, this was going to be the most thorough and complete examination of this.
What we wanted to add was to make it extremely comprehensive and to use data to kind of prove where black coaches were getting stuck.
And we showed this through both the data and the video interviews, so you could watch Tony Dungy and 5 other voices on one topic, and we got one owner who agreed to go on the record.
It told you how their privilege provided opportunities for them that wouldn't happen for a black person. It's just that what a leader looks like is someone that came up the way he did. This is how unconscious bias works.
There's really no arguing with it when you can look at decades of data and say, here's exactly what is happening.
And I think that's the mark of a great work of journalism. I do think that it delivered a level of scrutiny that the NFL knew was there this hiring cycle and is going to be there from now on.
Nightmare in Nigeria by Reuters, an investigation of a secret forced abortion program carried out by the Nigerian military.
This is Aisha, one of the thousands of women and girls kidnapped and forced into sexual slavery by Boko Haram in Nigeria.
These were women who had been abducted and in many cases raped by Islamist militants.
Reuters has tallied at least 10,000 pregnancies terminated by Nigeria's army since 2013.
These were women who had been deeply traumatized. It was really difficult to ask them to share these stories.
We were able to be detailed and provide times and locations.
We were also hearing stories about children who had been targeted for killing by the military.
The military, though, denies the abortion program ever existed and denies troops ever targeted children for killing.
These stories really made the international community stop and demand investigations.
I hope that shining a light on what's going on brings some accountability and justice for the victims.
And the third finalist and the winner is Frontline and the Associated Press for Putin's Attack on Ukraine, documenting war crimes.
Здесь погибла моя семья.
5 members of Katerina's family were killed.
Our job was to document a war crime, to find a war crimes, and one of the first things that we decided to do was to go to the Bucha morgue.
The town of Bucha was a shocking scene of violence against civilians and would change the world's view of war crimes in Ukraine.
Russian soldiers
killed my husband.
They came across Tanya. Her husband had been kidnapped weeks before and killed, and she did not know why.
What do you do with that suffering? I wanted to create a space where those stories would accumulate and we could see the patterns and the scale of what was happening.
Hey, Jeff. We're good. We just crossed the border.
Kienitz was part of a team of reporters from Frontline and the Associated Press focusing on war crimes.
All of this human suffering would appear one day and disappear the next under the next wave of news. But what happens next?
We started cataloging the daily attacks, both using our first-hand reporting and online information like satellite data and social media posts.
We got a real breakthrough, which came in the form of 80,000 CCTV videos and 2,000 intercepted phone calls from around Bucha.
We know that on March 4th, this group of 9 guys are escorted across the street from number 31 Yablonska to 144 Yablonska at gunpoint.
Torture and killing at 144 Yablunska would become the main focus for Ukraine's war crimes prosecutors.
Here was 8 bodies.
It provided an incredible investigative tool for us to actually give a little bit more explanation for the viewer as to really what happened.
What we were looking at was actually a cleansing operation unfolding in real time on video.
The truth is that there's no such thing as a slam dunk when it comes down to war crimes and international law. The evidence that we collected did end up having some kind of an accountability impact.
In the early years of these Scripps Howard Awards, there wasn't much in the way of visuals beyond black and white in newspapers and TV. But then came color graphics and video and interactive media, turning journalism into a visual experience matching the quality of the reporting. Tonight's finalists for the Scripps Howard Award for Visual Human Interest Storytelling combine frontline reporting with exceptional creativity. They are USA Today for the siege of Mariupol and the war in Ukraine.
We didn't set out to do a graphic novel. We really just had this huge amount of really incredible source material and interviews, and we wanted to keep telling the story of what was happening in this city.
The story was basically surviving through the siege in Mariupol, losing their home and losing their lives, and enduring weeks of this huge city being under siege.
I really did want to do it justice. I wanted to honor these people, to bear witness to what they went through. It became kind of clear to me that a graphic novel approach was probably the best way to actually tell the story.
As a Ukrainian, I just want people to be immersed in Mariupol under siege, to relate to people not having water, electricity, and then missiles all the time raining on the city.
It turned out to be one of the things when we posted to social media that got the most engagement for the entire year.
I really struggle because it's my home and it's my people. We're telling the stories of those people, so Mariupol and its residents are not forgotten.
Los Angeles Times for Hollywood's Finest, a profile of homelessness and pregnancy in the heart of LA.
She called me and said, "Mom, I need you." And that's all she had to say.
I started reporting on this from a very simple question: what is it like to be homeless and pregnant at the same time? Kat explained that her daughter was 7 months pregnant, living in a tent in Hollywood.
California Highway Patrol had cleared her homeless encampment and thrown away everything. All 3 of the women that we featured in Hollywood's Finest had lost children to the foster care system.
We hadn't really covered intergenerational homelessness.
They're gonna take everything from me, bro. Like, she took my housing voucher, so I stopped answering the phone, and then they took my daughter because of this.
I think it's important to let the person you're photographing know that you're like a diary and their life matters, and that's the reason why you're there.
I've always known there were holes in the system, but what this showed is there is no system.
Christina happened to be pregnant at the same time that Mackenzie was pregnant. To realize that she wasn't going to see her child again because that was something
unfathomable to me. And I don't know how she's moving on, but she is.
And the third finalist and winner is San Francisco Chronicle for its visual team portfolio, a deep dive series exploring the complex challenges confronting the Golden City.
Visual storytelling can bring you right into the space that someone's in. Ideally, you can taste it, touch it, smell it, sit with it. It can be immersive. It can allow you to have a lot of emotions.
We believe at the Chronicle that people respond more to what they feel than what they are told. And so we try to show them what things feel like.
Our visual team's portfolio consists of in-depth local reporting that reflects the people that live in San Francisco.
We focused really significantly on the opioid epidemic and its effect on our most vulnerable citizens, and we found that that has led to a lot of other social problems, and particularly housing insecurity.
I photographed a young girl named Winnie who lived in an SRO, which is a single room occupancy apartment.
That were designed to pull people out of homelessness.
Usually quite small room, does not have a kitchen or bathroom, and those facilities are shared.
We worked with the I-Team and discovered that San Francisco was actually spending millions of dollars to evict homeless folks rather than house them.
We photographed a couple of the characters in the stories that they were on the verge of being evicted.
It's sort of like a stigma to being homeless, and you feel like people are afraid of you, maybe even more so than they are. If they're homeless and they're looking for inspiration or a way to change, they can find it in my story, or there's plenty of stories out there.
We were really lucky with the subjects that we ended up with. We're just amazing people who had really great stories to tell and were really open to us.
I just want to see from their everyday to day life, what's it like? So I would spend as much time as I could with each person.
This project, Disaster in Plain Sight, exemplifies the best in journalism because it is an issue that affects all lives within this city. Really conceived as a response to the fentanyl crisis that we are experiencing here in the Bay Area.
As a society, we were supposed to be creating a safety net for them, and we weren't living up to that promise as a city and a community.
We found someone who was using and who had a mother who was very involved in their lives and trying to pull them out of fentanyl. I think there's a tendency to kind of look past each other and not really listen. And that is our role, is to really dive into the issues that are affecting a community and to report those issues in a way that people can understand them in a way that they did not before.
Coming up.
A lot of people thought that the piece was a very, very good summation of just like how propaganda and how messaging works today.
Shut up, dumb American.
Shut up,
racist. Shut up.
Shut up, shut up.
Shut up, shut up, shut up.
Welcome back to the studio. Journalists don't just cover wealth and power. We report on the world most people experience daily. To do it well means thinking outside that proverbial box, taking creative risks, and moving beyond the traditional boundaries of our craft. In other words, it takes innovation. The Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in Innovation honors Roy W. Howard, whose own ingenuity took him from newspaper boy to chairman of the Scripps Howard newspaper chain. The finalists are the Marshall Project, WOVU, and Cleveland Documenters for Testify.
Welcome to Testify, a show digging into Cuyahoga County's court system and the ways it is and isn't working.
We worked with folks to build a machine of scrapers that went to the court's website and pulled down all of this information.
And that way we could have this zoomed out analysis of the court system.
We built what we call the Testify FAQ, where folks come and they submit questions to us and we get the answers.
What kinds of judges are they likely to face? What kinds of situations are they likely to see?
When there are elections for judges, do you feel like there's enough information available to help you decide who to vote for?
No, I don't.
We should approach serving different audiences in different ways. The world needs more experimenting.
Local journalists have a long tradition of being responsive to the community. I think we're taking that a step further, inviting them into the process at each step.
Rolling Stone and Starling Lab for the DJ and the War Crimes.
I spent a year working with Starling Lab and Rolling Stone magazine on an investigative story about alleged war crimes perpetrated in Bosnia in 1992. There's one photograph in particular that is iconic.
In this famous shot, you see a soldier from behind as he appears to be kicking a dying or a dead woman.
I don't know who pulled the trigger, that it was obvious that I was witnessing a war crime.
Who is this man? Was there accountability? And with a team of investigative journalists in Bosnia and Serbia, we found him.
He has gone on to become a rather notable DJ in Serbia. A disinformation campaign used this photo by changing the patch on the sleeve of the soldier and making it look like it was a Ukrainian soldier who was committing a war crime. We realized that it would be a perfect case study to try and demonstrate ways that we could authenticate the original version of this photo. We're able to create what's essentially a digital fingerprint. And then if someone in the future wants to dispute whether or not it's real, you can take the fingerprint of that asset and compare it to the original.
We were overwhelmed with the response, and we really hope that the tools that we developed and the questions that we asked will lead to more innovation and push for accountability where there is none.
And the third finalist and winner is The Markup for Still Loading, an ingenious data-driven report exposing nationwide inequalities in internet access.
A brand new study says Detroiters are being charged the same prices for very unequal internet service. The study by the nonprofit The Markup found some people are paying over 100 times more for their data than their neighbors.
The thing that people often knew is that the internet service in their neighborhood wasn't great. But what they didn't know is that they were being asked to pay the same amount as folks in neighborhoods where the internet service was great. We used scraping techniques to gather data points on over 1 million plans.
That allowed us to be really ambitious and not just look at one small city, one provider, but 4 different providers in 38 major cities across the United States.
We collected data about the prices and the speeds they were charging, and we mapped those against, demographic factors like race and income and historical redlining status. Redlining is a reference to a series of maps that the federal government made in, I think, the 1930s to define different areas of cities based on kind of the risk that was involved in holding mortgages.
The effects of redlining are long-term. These neighborhoods still have higher rates of asthma and gunshot fatalities. It's only natural to look at other infrastructure developments and how they've been unequally distributed. And so the term digital redlining kind of occurred about looking at internet access.
We suspected that we weren't getting the services that we were paying for, but it wasn't until we started getting the media attention that we began to notice that our situation wasn't unique.
Kansas City is a great example. There's a huge divide. One side has just a ton of slow internet plans from AT&T, the other is basically all fiber. And that line is like the historical segregation line. Indeed, we found disparities in all but 2 of the major cities. Getting that proof is the first step of saying that there's actually something structurally wrong here.
Our community is going to have the fastest internet in town, and I'm really proud of that, and I have to give a lot of that credit to the power of the press, because we suffered in silence for so long before this.
Hopefully, by giving people access to these data sets and showing them how to make their own, they have more agency to understand these systems and demand accountability.
By the time I utter the category of our next award, Excellence in Multimedia Journalism, there will undoubtedly be a new form of it. I cannot keep up with the speed, from groundbreaking advances in real-time crowdsourced reporting to the latest in data analysis and visual investigations. As long as they stop short of replacing me with AI, I'm fine with it. Tonight's finalists for the Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in Multimedia Journalism are The Wall Street Journal for Russian war crimes in Ukraine.
Minute by minute, you're seeing Russians come into towns and bombs that are being dropped. And we started thinking, what's the best way to actually document that? It's happening in real time.
We zeroed in on the Road of Death, which was on the outskirts of Kiev.
It's one strip of road that civilians were using to evacuate.
It was the only way out. So we sent a reporter in to identify various locations.
What we found was the civilians were being targeted by Russian forces as they fled. A resident sent us 2 short dash camera video clips that showed a car windshield and mortars flying in front of the vehicles.
Трупи, вони
вже синівші, розстріляні автомобілі, в яких угадувались силуети дітей. Мої діти все це бачили.
It was cited in a Senate resolution that described what was happening on that particular road as part of a broader genocide on the Ukrainian people.
You're piecing together all these various aspects of a war crime. You're showing where it happened, you're showing who it happened to and how it happened. And when you actually see it and you document it and you prove it, it's irrefutable.
San Francisco Chronicle for Broken Promise, an immersive expose of that city's failure to confront its epidemic of addiction and homelessness.
Broken Promises was a series of stories that we did about the opioid epidemic and its effect on our most vulnerable citizens.
We really wanted to dive into all aspects of the crisis in the lives that it touches. We found a doctor who works at a local hospital. We found a business that has to deal with the issues that fentanyl causes every day.
This drug, it gets a hold of these people, man, and it don't let them go.
We were trying to do alternative storytelling, utilizing graphics, diagrams, animations, documentary photography, and video.
After the articles came out, the city is finally taking steps to make harm reduction a more achievable goal. This is a, years, sometimes decades long process. We're committed to finding a way to reach people so that people realize that it affects all of us.
And the third finalist and winner is the New York Times for its 360-degree visual investigation inside the apocalyptic worldview of Tucker Carlson Tonight.
Well, American men are in deep trouble. If you destroy men or complete the destruction of men, they're pretty close to being destroyed, I would say. How does it help women exactly?
Whether or not you agree with him or disagree with him, it's undeniable that he's a massive influence in American society.
We watched 1,150 shows.
Because of climate change. That's how
so
the
much
world
of this
would be
you
different
don't
if it
know.
weren't for humans.
You pretend that you know, but you don't know.
And a lot of people who read the New York Times have never watched an episode of his show, but have a very, very strong opinion of who this person is. And we think that just showing you what he says and how this fits into a broader context is pretty important.
They want power. They want power. They hate you. They want to hurt you. They call you a racist. They call you racist.
As you watch 5 shows, 10 shows, 50 shows, 100 shows, you start to pick up on those patterns.
Shut up, dumb American. Shut up, racist. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up.
Shut up. Shut up. The investigation reveals is that he is mainstreaming a lot of these white nationalist concepts.
He splits the world into us versus them, and they are out to get you.
Replace the population. This policy is called the Great Replacement.
The most extreme is this idea of replacement theory, that there's a ruling class of elites that are working to replace kind of traditional Americans with a more obedient underclass.
So that they can elect more Democrats.
They can import an entirely new electorate from the third world and change the demographics of the U.S. so completely they'll never lose again.
She's kind of saying these same phrases over and over again.
White nationalism. Let's be literal for a minute. What is that? What is white supremacy? We still don't know.
It's gotten a huge response. It's been cited in congressional testimony and by organizations that study extremism.
A lot of people thought that the piece was a very, very good summation of just like how propaganda and how messaging works today.
The point is to disarm you, to strip you of your autonomy, your power, your right of self-defense.
The process is laborious and sometimes painful, but it is a really, really great way of thinking about the world, and it's a great way to do journalism.
The New York Times can unequivocally say that Tucker Carlson is the most racist host on television in modern history.
So shut up, white man.
Imagine that the shooter, you're his family, and you knew that he needed help and that nobody was giving it to him, and you were trying to ask for help.
Every year, the Scripps Howard Awards honors a very special category, opinion. Opinion writing combines all the best qualities of journalism: dogged reporting about critical issues, compelling writing, commitment to exposing the truth, and it adds something more: advocacy, awareness, and a call to action. To present the award for excellence in opinion writing is last year's winner, City Hall columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle, Heather Knight.
For me, opinion writing is about upholding that old journalism axiom: afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. It's what helped me win this award last year for a series taking city officials to task for the lack of resources to help a mother's drug-addicted daughter, build enough housing in this city, and fix its public schools. This year's nominees for the Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in Opinion Writing are Jerry Brewer of the Washington Post.
Typically, opinion writers respond to the series after the fact. In the NFL, you just continue to see very few minority coaches hired. And I said I want to do my own special reporting and not react to our reporting, being able to write in a narrative style while also telling hard-edged opinions.
He was really trying to tell the history of how we got here, where we are now, and where it could go.
The NFL, before it was popular, had this organic integration. They had a player coach by the name of Fritz Pollard. He was the first black coach in the NFL. The NFL had decided that they needed to segregate because if they wanted to become more popular, they couldn't have black players.
I think the biggest impact of the project, people are going to pay even greater attention and in a smarter, more detailed way.
Being able to be a voice for these voiceless coaches, those are great initial steps, but you do not solve institutional racism in one series.
Jeffrey Garrett of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette.
Most of my career, I've been honing in on criminal justice issues.
And he's the pit bull once he gets going.
The Allegheny County Jail had one of the highest death rates in the country. The warden was using false statistics to say, no, we have one of the lowest, but he was calculating them wrong. These deaths were not being reported to the federal and state government. There's a lot of public opposition, and that's been generated by these editorials. The county executive finally stepped in and he proposed legislation that would set up a complete statewide body that would review any death inside any jail in Pennsylvania.
There are people walking around, and people not walking around free necessarily, but people who are doing better even behind bars because of the light Jeff shined.
And the winners are Erica D. Smith and Anita Chabrier of the Los Angeles Times.
A wildfire out of control in Northern California.
Fires that scorched Northern California this month were some of the deadliest recorded in the state.
The fire killed 85 people.
A place staring down the barrel of a hot, dry climate, ripe for spreading fire.
The economic toll will likely be devastating too.
The story is about the town of Greenville, which burned to the ground in the Dixie Fire, and about the efforts of residents to rebuild and whether or not they should rebuild.
If we can't rebuild every town that is destroyed by tragedy, how do we choose? How do we have that discussion?
There's also this kind of disagreement on what exactly are we building back? What is the community going to look like?
Our columns are reported. So I go out and I report it just like I did for a news story.
I really wanted it to make it as much about the people there as possible.
Some of it they were going to like and some of it they weren't.
But we also wanted to bring some science to it, right? Things are not going to get better. Everybody agreed on that. The disagreement came in about what you do about it.
We challenge each other's ideas and we make them stronger. She's always a little bit to the left of me. That little bit of tension really sharpens everything that we do.
I think if those elements are in there, I think it makes for a good column.
The columns we wrote, it's not really about Greenville. It's about all the Greenvilles, whether they're on the coast of Florida or in the mountains of California. These are places where people have settled because of the cost of living. The inequity has turned dangerous with climate change.
The way that we fund disasters, we just fund them like they're rare. And they're not rare. They happen all the time now. I mean, right now in California, there have been not one but two presidential national disaster declarations.
When we went to put a dollar figure on how much rebuilding Greenville would cost, we assumed that somebody was keeping track of that. What we found is that nobody is keeping track of that.
Greenville is a town that was not that big to begin with. Last we checked, about 300 people who say they want to move back.
We gathered our own numbers and came up with this $1 billion figure.
$1 billion for 300 people. And the same thing keeps happening. It's kind of the definition of insanity, right?
We've had a lot of feedback from academics and from politicians and people who have read it.
We're starting to see some policies that are taking into account climate change and the risk of wildfire, but it needs to be more comprehensive.
Before these columns, it was kind of a taboo thing. You could never say, well, should we rebuild every Greenville? And I think what these columns did is just open it up so that we can have this critical discussion.
All right, folks, let's gear up for our next category, excellence in local and regional investigative reporting. In this era, when local newsrooms are increasingly stretched by tight budgets and fragmented audiences, the importance of local news cannot be underestimated. Without it, our citizens can't make informed decisions about their own communities. Tonight's finalists are KARE 11 Investigates for The Gap, Failure to Treat, Failure to Protect.
We found that people who were charged with crimes and found incompetent to stand trial because they were too mentally ill were being released, and often finding these defendants were going on to reoffend. You feel like you have a responsibility to show to the public that this is happening time and time again.
We identified 6 murders, countless sexual assaults and violent assaults from people who'd been previously charged with a crime and then let go because they were mentally incompetent to go to trial.
Imagine that the shooter, you're his family, and you knew that he needed help and that nobody was giving it to him, and you were trying to ask for help.
They called them gap cases because people were falling through gaps, but no one was tracking it.
The governor signed a multi-million-dollar plan to better treat and supervise people who are found mentally incompetent to stand trial.
Our lawmakers have promised reforms. They're initiating them, but we're going to be here. Our reporting's not done.
The Charlotte Observer and the News and Observer for Security for Sale.
Security for Sale came to me from a real estate source. These institutional investors are buying up everything that's available in cash, no contingencies.
These are companies that are buying single homes and converting them to rentals.
They were actually upsetting the housing security of so many different people.
Getting an accurate count of how many homes these companies actually own can be pretty difficult, but we can get that sort of big number, that 40,000 number.
These landlords have so many properties and they're really only looking at them as an investment. Perhaps they're not treating their tenants the way a tenant would hope to be treated.
The sewage started backing up in mid-August. I had to end up contacting the Attorney General, and I'm still trying to get my deposit refunded back to me.
Homeowners are competing with these national companies with Wall Street backing, many of them, that have effectively unlimited amounts of capital.
If something isn't done to rein it in, it's going to be too late, that they can continue buying until there's no more houses left to be bought.
And the third finalist and winner is AL.com for the rise and fall of a predatory police force.
Across America, and especially in the South, a simple traffic citation can turn into a mountain of debt.
The story started with this tiny town of Brookside, which was preying on people in an egregious way.
Money from fines and forfeitures soared more than 600%, to the point where it made up half the town budget.
The worst thing you can hear and see is a siren and lights behind it.
It tanked my credit. It cost me hundreds of dollars. I was paying $700 a month to go back and forth to work after I lost my car. It's a life ruiner.
The idea that we were funding a town or any other part of government from tickets, whether it was from people who were poor or people who were just passing through, I think that to me really is what broke through.
There were people who would get pulled over and arrested for having a single joint and ended up having like 12 misdemeanor charges, and the guy was fined, more than $10,000.
It's almost like a band of pirates along the interstate. These were officers who were driving completely blacked out vehicles that did not identify them as police officers. They were wearing dark masks.
They would bring out their drug-sniffing dog named Cash. They had a sort of a tank.
Right outside the court, there's these people just in these long, crazy lines waiting to get inside to see the town judge about how much money they're gonna owe us.
Brookside is this sort of Rosetta Stone that helps people understand the greater issue of criminalization of poverty. But the problem is not Brookside. Brookside is an extreme example of it.
We wanted to look and see, if any other towns were doing similar things. We came up with a list of the worst speed trap towns in Alabama. We called it taxation by ticket citation. What we ended up finding is they're doing it better, less egregious, but more efficient.
It was condemned across both aisles in the Alabama legislature, which passed 4 laws within a couple of months. Much of the police department was fired or resigned.
Conservatives and libertarians and liberals, nobody likes the idea that police are essentially armed debt collectors. And to me, that's what really made it break through the politics.
It was like a miracle to hear that one of these crooked municipalities in Alabama was finally going to be held accountable for the things that they did.
Coming up, the night's biggest prize. Who will win the Impact Award? And now, our final award of the night, the Scripps Howard Impact Award. You've already heard about our 42 finalists, how they produce their excellent work, and what it means to them, their audiences, and their communities. Tonight's winner has been selected from this impressive group as the creator of the reporting that has made the greatest difference. The finalists are Indianapolis Star, the Columbus Dispatch, Cincinnati Enquirer, and USA Today for their combined coverage of a 10-year-old's abortion. The Wall Street Journal for Russian war crimes in Ukraine. And the third finalist and winner is a surprise, which we'll show you now. Well, actually, we're gonna go talk to the winner. She doesn't know we're coming, so I'm gonna surprise her.
I am an elementary school teacher who is incredibly grateful for all the work you have done to bring to light the issues with how we teach children to read.
Emily,
Hi.
I'm Christian Bryant. How are you?
I'm good.
Very nice to meet you.
How are you? Nice to meet you too.
I hate to interrupt, but
okay.
I have to tell you that Sold a Story, How Teaching Kids to Read Went So Wrong, is the winner of this year's prestigious Scripps Howard Impact Award.
Oh my gosh.
This is for you.
This is it. Wow.
How about that?
It's real hardware.
What are you
Don't
thinking
drop
right now?
it.
Exactly. It is. You can get a workout with this thing.
Wow. All right, I need one.
I want to ask you this. Tell me about the team and tell me about the impact this story has had.
Could never have done it without the team. And we have gotten an overwhelming response. People are writing and saying, this is me, this is my story. I knew this, I didn't know this, I wanted to know this. And things are changing in response. Thank you, you composed a song many of us chirped for years without results. Your reporting is starting a movement. Almost half of the responses we got in total were from teachers. There is a lot of direct action being taken.
It's finally getting to policymakers, to people who sit on school boards, to administrators, that something has been off about the way they've been teaching reading.
So getting this award is really affirming. I hope other reporters will get that message and realize this is something that your readers and your listeners and your viewers care about.
Congratulations to all of our finalists. Folks, that's our program for tonight. It's been a privilege to be able to recognize the work of so many of my talented colleagues across print, television, audio, and multimedia. In these uncertain times, it's comforting to know that great journalists still rise to meet the challenge to produce outstanding work we can all be proud of. I'm Christian Bryant. Thank you for joining us, and have a good night.
I think journalism is more than a job, it's more than a career. I think it's actually a calling.
Looking at some of the great historical examples of investigative reporting at all levels just kind of inspires me to continue digging, and that's what it's about.
It's often kind of journalists who are first on the ground who are able to kind of raise the alarm and just kind of draw the world's attention.
We all get into journalism because we want to help our communities and make the world a better place.
We're the ones that do the nitty-gritty. We go to the school board meetings that nobody wants to sit through, and it's not glamorous, but for us it's what we want to be doing.
We'll talk about the death of newspapers and the death of local news and the things that I really want young people in this business to know about. We can still make a difference.
we have to be fair, to be tough, to report against our own assumptions at all times, to check our biases.
So much has changed in journalism, but something that hasn't changed is the fact that journalists have always been at risk while doing their jobs.
In this era of disinformation, we have to ask hard questions and think of new ways of doing the reporting and presenting the information.
Being able to stand strong and being able to hold people accountable is just fundamental to what we do, and it's going to continue to be.